Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Live Ones College Football Preview. Today, we're previewing what's probably the historically most diverse conference in college football, the ACC. And when I say diverse, I mean you get a little bit of everything in terms of style of football, emphasis on aspects of the game, and its ebbs and flows from year to year. A lot of conferences have their identity, a lot of that owing to the regions of the country in which they play, which are rapidly disappearing as college football consolidates, of course, and geography becomes less important. But, you have the Big Ten, which has its nucleus in the upper Midwest, and it has to deal with frequent foul weather as the season gets into October and November. So it places its emphasis on winning the battle in the trenches, running the football. Defense is built around stopping the run. Offensive and defensive lines really, really powerful out of the Big Ten. The Big 12 is in the Great Plains and Texas and stays hot, humid, and dry well into November. Perfect passing weather all the time. Tends to be built heavily on passing the ball. Lots and lots of offense. Places an emphasis on offense more so than anything else. The SEC for decades had the money and the resources to recruit the best athletes from all over the country and train them to play in the positions that best suit them, even if it wasn't the position they were initially recruited to play. The ACC, historically different, with schools in Boston, upstate New York, Pittsburgh, all down through the Mid-Atlantic, down to southern Florida. You have to play in all types of environments, and so you tend to get a little bit of everything. For 6 years, this was a conference that was run completely by Dabo Swinney's Clemson Tigers. That all changed last year as the offense got bit by the injury bug and it became apparent that DJU was not the quarterback of the future. NC State and Wake Forest were ascendant, but frankly, neither one of them was ready to take the mantle yet, and this wound up being the weakest of the Power 5 conferences overall. Can Clemson get back to its national championship form? Can any other school get this conference back to the college football playoff? Let's take a deep dive and find out. And we start with Boston College. Jeff Hafley's second season was derailed by an injury to quarterback Phil Jurkovec in September. Although Jurkovec eventually returned in November, his absence was a huge blow to an offense that only scored 40 points in the 4 conference games that he missed. And there was just no climbing out of the hole that they dug. Jurkovec is back, and he's poised to be a difference maker, building on his sophomore year in 2020, where we saw that he had all the tools to shine as kind of a dink and dunk game manager type under center. He's going to be helped out by running back Pat Garwa III, who's coming off an outstanding 1,000-yard season. The Eagles bring back 7 starters on defense, and there's optimism for improvement from a unit that held teams to just 22 points a game last fall. The defense actually was pretty good. The stars are the cornerback duo of Josh DeBerry and Jaden Woodby. Obviously, they're the 2 standouts on the back end. They combined for 85 tackles, 4 interceptions, and 3 fumble recoveries last year. The weakness of this team is in the trenches. The offensive line was not solid last year, and it only returns 1 starter, and the defensive line didn't really have anybody stand out as a sack or a pressure machine. Looking at the schedule, this team's out-of-conference Power 5 game is home against Rutgers, and I think they've got the tools to at least get that done. They get Clemson at home, but I think Clemson can only possibly be improved over last year. Notre Dame on the road will probably be a loss. Wake Forest on the road, loss. NC State, loss. Florida State on the road, that's probably going to be a 50-50 toss-up. Everyone else they should beat. I think this is a 7-5 team this year. Oh, Clemson. Well, that sucked, didn't it? The team struggled on offense, got bit by the injury bug, especially along its NFL-caliber defensive line. They finished dead last in the ACC in passing efficiency, second to last in total offense. And, it went 9-3. Its losses were to national champion Oregon, or national champion Georgia, ACC champion Pitt, and a much-improved NC State. But that's just how high the bar of expectations was set under Dabo Swinney. After Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, the ball was turned over to DJU, who was, let's generously say, not ready to fill those shoes. 56% completion percentage with 9 touchdowns and 10 picks. Those are not Clemson quarterback numbers. But he is going to be the quarterback again until star recruit Cade Klubnik is ready to take it over from him. The offense got all the headlines for all of its problems, but the defense was its usual national championship level self. First in the ACC, 8th in the nation overall, 2nd in the nation in scoring defense, great pass rush, never allowed more than 27 points, and that was all with a couple of really key injuries and a few other parts mixing in. This defense is stacked. I mean, just stacked. Tyler Davis, Brian Brees, and Miles Murphy, all future NFL players. If they all stay healthy, this is going to be the best front 4 in college football this year. Trenton Simpson is a rising star at linebacker, and safety Andrew Makuba is poised for a career year. Eventually you do have to score points in football in order to win, but this defense is going to likely keep the opponent's average score really, really low, definitely under the 20-point mark again on average, again, if everyone stays healthy. Schedule-wise, the big game, the game to circle on the calendar is the October 1st home game against NC State. That game is going to be an absolute slugfest that can go either way. Likely to be appointment television. Also, obviously, as it happens every 3 years, this team has a date with Notre Dame. This time on the road in South Bend. Who knows how good Notre Dame is from year to year. We're just going to have to see how that game shakes out. This team should win the ACC again. Whether or not they're going to be good enough to get back to the college football playoff with this offense, I just don't know. Duke went 3-9 last year. The offense fell flat under a legendary offensive head coach in David Cutcliffe. All their talented players left in the transfer portal. They have a rookie head coach. Nothing about this team is even worth mentioning. They're going to beat North Carolina A&T, and it's a 50-50 toss-up game to open the season at home against Temple. 2-10 is the best this team could possibly do. Next. Florida State. Man, you talk about a team that has fallen so far in prestige in so short a time. Basically, Clemson has had this great run of theirs because Florida State voluntarily gave up their position atop the conference. Where do you want to start with the Seminoles last year? Well, they had that overtime loss to Notre Dame in which their defense gave up 41 points, and it was all downhill from there. They lost in humiliating fashion to FCS Jacksonville State on a last-second touchdown where their entire secondary had a chance to tackle the receiver and missed. They didn't win a game until Week 5 against an equally bad Syracuse, and even that was just way too close. They finished 5-7. This team has literally been nothing of any consequence since Jimbo Fisher left for Texas A&M. This despite recruiting classes that continue to be ranked in the top 20 nationwide year after agonizing year. So who's going to be on the field this year? Well, the quarterback Jordan Travis did show improvement, throwing for 2,074 yards and 22 touchdowns last year. They've gotten a couple of wide receivers through the transfer portal in Micah Pittman from Oregon and Johnny Wilson from Arizona State. Both of these guys were great deep threats for their respective schools who were blocked by receivers ahead of them up on the depth chart. And there's actually the potential for a big step up in the offensive game. This team was middle of the road on defense, allowed 379 yards and 26.5 points a game. Some of those bad defensive performances, though, were against offenses that really didn't have a whole lot going for them, like Syracuse and Louisville. I really think this team just packed it in after that 0-4 start. Not only that, but their best two pieces, Jermaine Johnson and Keir Thomas, are both gone. So it's going to be a struggle again. Schedule-wise, can Mike Norvell at least get this team back to a bowl game? Well, he better stack up on wins at the beginning and the end of the season because October is going to be a nightmare. Home against Wake Forest, loss. On the road against NC State, loss. Home against Clemson, at Miami, loss. Their marquee out-of-conference game Week 2 is against LSU in the Superdome, loss. That gives them a cushion of only one loss between Duquesne, Louisville, Georgia Tech, Syracuse, Louisiana, and Florida. Florida's the last game of the year, a rivalry game. Who knows what's going to happen there? But, man, it's going to be a tall order to get back to 6-6, and that's the best they can hope for, I think. Georgia Tech, more trash. Nothing's working in this Jeff Collins rebuild. 22 out of the last 29 losses for this team were by double digits. It's not even a remotely competitive football team. The Yellow Jackets do have a gamer at quarterback. It's their one bright spot, Jeff Sims. He can run. He has 2 years of experience, and he's shown enough flashes to think that he might be ready to break out as a playmaker if he can just, keep the interceptions down. That's been his problem. He makes bad throws when he has no help anywhere. Leading receiver Malachi Carter is a good prospect, and he needs to be used more, but 489 yards and 2 touchdowns from your number one wide receiver is not setting the world on fire. The defense was horrible. It was inefficient, and it lost top tackler, linebacker Quez Jackson, and safety Januye Thomas. To the NFL. And their best 2 other pieces to the transfer portal. If anything, it's going to be worse this year. Looking at the schedule, at the very least, they don't play NC State, and they get the Clemson game out of the way Week 1. They'll beat Western Carolina, they'll beat Duke, and I honestly don't know who else. It's going to be another really bad year for the Yellow Jackets, and it's honestly probably time to move on from Jeff Collins. Louisville played another season of uninspired football under Scott Satterfield, losing 6 games in conference, and when the ACC was as bad as it was last year, uninspired looks bad. I have to think that the seat is starting to get a little warm for Satterfield. The one bright spot to this team last year was that they did have a phenomenal Lamar Jackson-type quarterback in Malik Cunningham. He ran for over 1,000 yards and 20 scores and threw for close to 3,000 yards with 19 touchdowns and 6 picks. His receivers are back and they're experienced. I have a feeling that the Cardinals games aren't going to be the least bit boring this year, if nothing else. The defense was it was so bad. particularly up front against the run. This line was undersized and got pushed around a lot. Getting 305-pound Jermaine Lole from Arizona State is quite literally going to be a huge help. You see what I did there? The secondary is getting some guys back from injury that probably would have improved matters a lot last season. Schedule-wise, this team just has to do a better job of winning the toss-up games. Syracuse, UCF, Boston College, Virginia, and Florida State. They take 3 of those games. This is a team that should go bowling. The Miami Hurricanes, we knew it wasn't going to be great last year, but hey, things are absolutely looking up because Mario Cristobal is coming home at long last. And man, the hype machine is out in full force. Miami went a disappointing 7-5 last year, but they lost to North Carolina, Virginia, and Florida State by a grand total of 8 points. They could have just as easily been ACC champions. Them's the breaks, Last year was the Tyler Van Dyke show at quarterback. He took over for the injured De'Aaron King early, and he just went off balling, throwing for close to 3,000 yards with 25 touchdowns and 6 picks. He just looked great and poised in the pocket, very, very calm in the clutch, had no problems, coming from behind. And you got to remember, he's a freshman. His performance had people, starting to say, hey, maybe future NFL draft pick here. And now he's got a quarterback whisperer in charge of the team with Cristobal. Things can only get better for this kid. The defense needs some work. It lost a ton of players through the transfer portal and graduation. There's nothing but new faces to work with, and we have no idea how well they'll gel as a unit just yet. I just go ahead and use last year's middle-of-the-road performance as a benchmark until we see otherwise. Schedule-wise, this team's going to look great early before getting tested hardcore at the end of the season. Their road game against Texas A&M in Week 3 should be a lot of fun, but it's probably going to be a loss. Other than that, I don't see another sure loss on their schedule for the first 10 weeks, honestly. I mean, they miss NC State, they miss Wake Forest, and they miss Boston College this year. That's insanely lucky. But then sitting at 9-1, they're going to get a road game against Clemson on November 19th and then home against Pitt to close it out. That's going to be where the rubber meets the road and we see what kind of a team this is. Frankly, I'm not sure how well this defense full of new faces is going to hold up. I think they'll wind up either 8-4 or 9-3 for the year, an important step in the rebuild and hopefully working their way back up into title contention. NC State was the overlooked, really, really good team of 2021. They went 9-3, and 2 out of their 3 losses were on the road by a total of 4 points. They could have just as easily won 11 games and been the ACC champion. Still wouldn't have made the playoffs by my reckoning. But in any event, the hype is strong for this year, and I think it's well-deserved. They have the 28th ranked offense in the country and the 14th ranked defense outside of the SEC and Ohio State. It's very rare in the past couple of decades to find a college football team that's top 30 on both sides of the ball in a single season. Devin Leary was stellar at quarterback, 3,400 yards, and get this, 35 touchdowns to only 5 interceptions. Those are NFL caliber numbers. And he was only a sophomore, and he gets most of his offensive line back. And while he's missing his top 2 running backs and his favorite receiver, this was a spread offense last year, and he should not want for targets. The defense gets back 8 starters, and on top of it, it gets a couple of really important pieces back that missed last year due to injury in Isaiah Moore and Peyton Wilson. I mean, Wilson alone, he was the team's leading tackler in 2019 and 2020, and despite missing all last year, this was a defense that was 14th overall in the nation, like we said. Looking at the schedule, honestly, why not the Wolfpack? That should be their mantra. Why not us? If they can beat Clemson in that huge game on October 1st, the stage is set for them to run the tables on the rest of the conference. Their out-of-conference Power 5 game is against Texas Tech, which they should win. Clemson and Wake Forest, those are the only 2 games that they could conceivably lose. This is an 11-1 or a 10-2 team right now. Again, as long as everybody stays healthy, as long as everybody stays up to form, if they beat Clemson, I think they'll win the division and the ACC and be the ACC champions. They're that good. The hype is real for this team. North Carolina, forever the mid-tier, forever the Chernobyl meme. Not great, not terrible. Went 6-6 last year, lost in the bowl game to South Carolina, and now Sam Howell is the latest NFL backup quarterback who's going to make Carson Wentz have a complex and want to play for a different NFL team. Although, honestly, you really don't need a whole lot of motivation to want out of D.C. Howell was great in the Carolina Blue. The offense finished 10th in the nation overall. They scored 35 points a game, and they just cranked it up. They found the pop. So why did they go 6-6? Well, that offense just wasn't enough because the defense was the absolute drizzling shits. And now Mac Brown has a lot of tinkering to do on both sides of the ball because without Howell, the offense needs to center around his battery mate and Josh Downs. The lightning quick junior wide receiver broke it open for 1,300 yards and 8 touchdowns last year. 754 of those yards were after the catch, which was third in the country among receivers. So it really doesn't matter who's throwing to this kid as long as they're reasonably accurate, because he's a threat to break any catch for a big play no matter where it is on the field. Defense, what do you want me to say? It was just as bad as the offense was good. They gave up 418 yards a game and 32 points allowed. It's just a testament to how good Sam Howell was that this team managed to stay 500 with a defense this bad. I really can't spotlight anyone as saying that's the guy that's going to take a step up this year, because there really isn't anyone. Schedule-wise, there's no Clemson, so that's something. Their toughest 2 games, NC State and Notre Dame, they're both at home, so there's that. The game I'm honestly circling is the Week 2 matchup against a very good Appalachian State team. I honestly think that game is going to be the difference between a bowl game and no bowl game for this team. They're going 6-6 once again. Best this team can do. I know it's a cliche, but this is just a constant mid-tier team. 4 more to go, and let's talk last year's champions. The Pittsburgh Panthers. They took advantage of Clemson's problems and finally got themselves to the promised land. Their program I've always loved under Pat Narduzzi. This team has proven it belongs among the top tier of the ACC, even if it's not always as good as Clemson. The style of football that Narduzzi plays, which is focused on controlling the clock, keeping the chains moving, and winning the trenches and turnover battles, the way football used to be all the time, it's good enough to beat any team in the country at any point in the season. Doesn't matter who they are. Kenny Pickett may be a Pittsburgh Steeler now, but guess what? USC transfer Keaton Slovis is coming in and honestly might be a more talented quarterback all around. Slovis threw 30 touchdown passes as a freshman and 17 touchdown passes in 6 games in 2020. So, you extrapolate that out, and he was just getting better and better. The quarterback situation is just going to be fine. The running back trio of Israel Abanikanda, Vincent Davis, and Rodney Hammond combined for 1,600 yards and 20 touchdowns. All 3 of them are back. The defensive line is once again going to be just an absolute terror. They were 2nd in the nation in sacks and 5th in tackles for loss last year. They're just loaded from top to bottom. So everyone else off front is gonna feed off of the tackles. They're great. The weakness of this team, as everyone knows, is the secondary. Good quarterbacks can and will destroy it, and that's going to be the difference against teams like NC State and Wake Forest, who will bomb out against them. Looking at the schedule, there's no Clemson and there's no NC State to deal with. There's no Notre Dame. Their tough games are against Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia, and Miami. I think the max they could lose there is 3 out of the 4. No reason to think that this team can't go 9-3 and be fighting with Miami for the Coastal title. Syracuse, they did not deserve their 5-7 record. They weren't that improved. The rest of the ACC was just trash, and all the breaks went their way. They had no passing game because they had no pass blocking. After absolutely everything was on the ground, and running back Sean Tucker, he just got good through endless repetition. This guy frequently got over 25 touches a game. They just ran him until his legs fell off. I don't trust Garrett Schrader at quarterback, and Tommy DeVito left for Illinois, of course. The defense was 2nd in the ACC behind Clemson, but a really distant 2nd. They fell apart at the end of the year. They allowed 113 combined points to Louisville, NC State, and Pitt. Still, it is the better side of the ball, and they do have some playmakers. Junior linebacker Michael Jones was 2nd team All-ACC with 119 tackles. Yeah, that's a lot for a linebacker. He had 3 sacks and 12 tackles for loss on top of it. Sophomore cornerback Garrett Williams is coming into his own. He's notched 116 tackles, 2 interceptions, 22 broken up passes, 1 sack, and 9 tackles for loss in his 2 years of ball so far. Schedule-wise, it's desperation time. Dino Babers needs a bowl season, but it's not going to be so easy. I wouldn't want to be the Orange in October. They've got NC State, Clemson, Notre Dame, and Pitt all in a row. Just brutal. They're out of conference Power 5 games against Purdue. That's going to be a loss. UConn and Wagner are sure wins. So that's 5 remaining games against Louisville, Virginia, Wake Forest, Boston College, and Florida State, of which they need to win 4. I don't see it happening. I think this team actually takes a step back this year and goes 4-8. It's probably time to take a look at maybe replacing the coach there. Virginia, basically copy and paste everything I said about North Carolina. A quarterback with absolutely insane numbers. I mean, insane numbers. 4,400 yards passing and 31 touchdowns, and this one's actually back for his senior year. But a defense that was 104th overall in the country gave up 460 yards and 32 points a game. That's like MAC defense numbers. That's so bad. Unsurprising that they went 6-6. Now they have a brand new head coach in his first gig, so at the very least, this team is going to have zero expectations. As mentioned, quarterback Brennan Armstrong will be back, and so will most of his receiving core. Offense is not going to be a problem, even if last year's numbers were out of the norm. What everyone's eyes are is on the defense. I'd look for Miami University transfer Cam Butler to at least make a little bit of noise. He had a great junior year with 8 sacks, 14 tackles for loss, and an interception. Honestly, despite playing in the MAC, he's better than anything else the Cavaliers had on their line last year. Schedule-wise, with the new coaching regime and the dynamic offensive pieces in place, it's really tough to forecast how good or bad this team is going to be. They're a wild card in a lot of the games on their schedule. They don't have to play Clemson, NC State, or Wake Forest. The second half of the season is going to be a really nice schedule for them. They only have to leave the state of Virginia once after October 1st. Pitt, North Carolina, and Miami are all home games. Oklahoma State is their out-of-conference game. That's going to be a loss. The road game against Illinois is a toss-up. Hell, most of their games are toss-ups. 7-5, I think, is the best team this team's going to be able to do. There's just too much random chance involved. Last, and definitely not least, is Wake Forest. How much fun was Wake Forest last year? I think I took the over on every single Wake Forest game after week 4, and almost all of them hit. This team was an offensive powerhouse last year, but, and this is a big but, the centerpiece of it, quarterback Sam Hartman, is out indefinitely with a non-football related medical issue. There's no timeline for his return, and that's scary, honestly. That's maybe something potentially really serious. We got to keep an eye on that. In the meantime, redshirt freshman Mitch Griffiths is going to take over for quarterback duties for the Demon Deacons as they prepare for their season. Star receiver A.T. Perry and a pair of 500-yard running backs returning, along with a seasoned offensive line that gets back most of its starters. They should still field a competent offense, even with Hartman out. Obviously, this team had no defense to speak of last year. It allowed 413 yards and 29 points a game, didn't do much of anything against the run, and only 5 teams in America gave up more first downs. They got no help through the transfer portal, and the only hope is that the group they do have gets better with experience. Looking at the schedule, it's not a bad deal. The Demon Deacons get Duke as its coastal road game, and it's at the end of the regular season, and North Carolina they get at home. Nobody's going to be complaining about missing Miami. They get to miss Pitt. They get to miss Virginia and Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech. The key is going to be how soon Sam Hartman returns, if at all. VMI and Vanderbilt should both be wins even without him, but then you get Liberty, Clemson, Florida State, and Army. This team could be hurting as it settles into conference play. They could go 9-3 or they can go 6-6. It really just all depends on Hartman. So there you have it, the ACC. Obviously, the fandom is hoping Clemson gets back into playoff form this year, and there's a lot to like in Pitt, Wake Forest, and especially NC State to keep everyone's interest peaked, even if they don't. But I think, just like last year, there's just way too much parity. A lot of these teams are going to cannibalize each other, and we might wind up with a situation where there's a 2-loss team that wins the conference and the ACC is shut out of the playoffs again. Next up, it's another conference going through some major changes in the near future, but still one of my personal favorites to watch. We'll be talking the Pac-12. I will see you next time.